It was a Tuesday morning, and Jessica was rushing through her usual routine. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. She had just dropped her son, Ethan, off at daycare and was already planning her day. Her boss had been pressuring her for the past few weeks to finish a big project at work, and the deadline was fast approaching. Jessica was used to juggling her responsibilities, being a single mom, balancing her job, and managing the household. Yet, she often felt like she was walking on a tightrope, unsure of how long she could keep the delicate balance. It had been a normal start to the day. Ethan had woken up in a good mood, laughing at the way Jessica had tried to make his pancakes into little smiley faces. They spent their breakfast talking about his favorite cartoons and his imaginary friends. After all, he was only 3, still trying to make sense of the world around him. Every day was a new adventure for him, and he had such a vivid imagination. For Jessica, these moments with him were the highlights of her life, even if they seemed simple to others. The drive to daycare was uneventful, just like every other day. Jessica's car idled at the same stoplights, passed by the same coffee shops, and navigated the same busy streets filled with commuters. As usual, she waved goodbye to Ethan with a quick kiss on his cheek as she handed him over to his daycare teacher, Mrs. Thomas. It was a routine that had become comforting to her. After dropping him off, Jessica had a few errands to run before heading to work. She picked up a coffee, grabbed some groceries, and then rushed back to her apartment, where the ticking clock reminded her of her looming work deadline. The apartment was quieter than usual when she stepped inside. She didn't like it. It felt empty without Ethan's laughter echoing off the walls. She immediately sat down at her desk, cracking open her laptop to review her to-do list. As the hours ticked by, Jessica's thoughts kept drifting back to Ethan. He had seemed unusually quiet this morning, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her babysitter, Karen. "Everything's fine with Ethan, but he's acting a little different today. He's been very quiet, and he keeps staring out the window. Should I be concerned?" Jessica paused, a small pit forming in her stomach. She quickly replied, "Just keep an eye on him. Let me know if anything changes." But even as she sent the message, her worry only deepened. She brushed it off for now, telling herself that it was probably nothing. Kids could be unpredictable, and Ethan was still learning how to navigate his emotions. But something in Jessica's gut told her that this wasn't just a phase. She tried to focus on her work, but the uneasy feeling gnawed at her. Around noon, Karen called, and Jessica's heart skipped a beat when she saw the name flash across her screen. "Hello? Hey, Jessica, I don't want to alarm you, but Ethan just did something really strange." Karen's voice was filled with uncertainty. "I'm not sure if I should be concerned, but I think you should know." "What happened?" Jessica's pulse quickened. Her mind was racing through a million scenarios, all of them far worse than the last. "Well," Karen paused, "Ethan was playing with his toys like usual, but then he suddenly grabbed my phone and started dialing something. I couldn't see exactly what he was doing at first, but then I heard him saying, 'Mommy,' over and over again." Karen's voice shook as she continued. "He called 911. I didn't realize it at first, but the operator picked up. When I figured out what was happening, I rushed over to stop it, but the line was already open." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean he called 911? "I don't know how it happened, but he somehow activated the emergency call," Karen explained, her voice becoming more frantic. "I didn't know what to do. The operator just kept asking him questions, and all he could say was 'Mommy' and 'Help.'" A shiver ran down Jessica's spine. "What did you tell the 911 operator?" "I tried to tell them that it was a mistake, that everything was fine, but they were already sending someone over. They said they had to investigate, just in case." Jessica's mind was racing now. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Ethan was only 3, he was too young to understand what 911 even meant. Why had he called for help? Was there something wrong that she hadn't noticed? Was he in danger? The questions spiraled, each one more urgent than the last. Without thinking, she grabbed her keys and rushed out the door. Her heart pounded in her chest as she drove back to the daycare, her mind spinning with what could be happening at home. The streets seemed emptier than usual, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the road. Every turn she made felt like it took her further away from answers. Her thoughts kept returning to Ethan. What had he seen? What had he heard? Was he scared? As Jessica pulled into her parking space outside the apartment, she saw a patrol car parked in front of her building. Her stomach dropped, and she felt the weight of her chest tighten. She hadn't expected the police to be here so quickly. Could it be that something had happened to Ethan? Could he have been in danger without anyone realizing it? She rushed inside, heart pounding in her ears. The first thing she saw was the police officer standing in her hallway, speaking with Karen. The officer was tall and stoic, his expression unreadable as he looked up when Jessica entered. "Ma'am, are you the mother of Ethan Smith?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Yes, I'm Jessica. What's going on?" "Is Ethan okay?" she blurted, her voice trembling. The officer glanced over at Karen, who was visibly shaken, then turned back to Jessica. "We received a 911 call from your son. He dialed the emergency number, but we weren't able to gather much information from the call itself. We need to ask a few questions to ensure everything is all right." Jessica could barely breathe as she nodded. He called 911. "I don't understand. He's so young. Why would he do that?" "We don't know yet," the officer replied, his tone softening a little. "That's why we need to talk to you and check everything. I'm sure everything is fine, but we can't take any chances. It's standard procedure." Jessica followed the officer into the living room, where Ethan was sitting on the couch, playing with his favorite toy truck. He looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. The sight of him, so calm and unaware of the gravity of the situation, made Jessica's heart ache. She bent down to him, her hands shaking as she gently took his tiny hand. "Ethan, sweetheart, why did you call 911? Ethan stared at her for a moment, then shrugged his small shoulders, his innocent expression unchanged. "I wanted to talk to Mommy," he said in his toddler voice, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Ethan had called for help, not because he was in immediate danger, but because he was worried about her. That innocent, childlike need to reach out in a moment of uncertainty had led to an emergency call that no one expected. The weight of the situation hit her all at once. The officer looked at Jessica with a mixture of understanding and concern. "It's lucky that nothing serious happened. But we need to make sure everything's all right. We'll need to file a report and check a few things, just to be thorough." Jessica nodded numbly, her mind still spinning. She had no idea what had just happened, but one thing was certain, the world around her had just shifted. The course of her day, her life, had changed in an instant. And this was only the beginning. As the officer asked a few more questions, Jessica stood silently by, still processing the events that had unfolded so quickly. Ethan, now sitting calmly on the couch, seemed oblivious to the tension in the room. His small fingers moved absent-mindedly over his toy truck, and he hummed a little tune to himself, unaware of the chaos his innocent actions had caused. Jessica felt a lump in her throat as she watched him. Her heart ached at the thought of how close they had come to a real emergency, even though everything seemed fine on the surface. The officer finished taking notes and stood up, giving Jessica a reassuring look. "Everything seems to be all right here, but we have to take a few more steps just to make sure," he said. It's standard procedure when a child calls 911, especially without a clear emergency. We'll have someone follow up, just to ensure there are no underlying issues that need attention. With a nod, he turned to leave, giving one last look at Ethan, who was still happily playing with his truck. Take care, ma'am. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call us. Jessica barely registered the officer's words as she stood frozen, watching him walk out of her apartment. She closed the door behind him slowly, trying to wrap her mind around everything that had just happened. Why had Ethan called 911? Why hadn't she noticed something was off? She had been so focused on her work, on the pressures of daily life, that she had missed something so simple, yet so important. The phone in her hand buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from her boss, reminding her about the deadline that was rapidly approaching. Jessica sighed and glanced over at Ethan, who was still playing, as if nothing had happened. She should have been grateful that he was safe, that nothing was wrong, but the nagging feeling in her gut wouldn't go away. Something had felt different today, something she couldn't quite place, and now this call. She had to find out more. Her mind was racing with questions. Was it just a fluke that Ethan had called 911, or was there something deeper going on? She remembered Karen's earlier message about how Ethan had been quiet all morning. He wasn't acting like his usual, energetic self. Could he have been trying to tell her something? Was there something wrong that he couldn't express in words, something only a mother's intuition could detect? Without a clear answer, Jessica felt a sense of urgency to get to the bottom of it. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something bigger than she could imagine. Ethan had always been a bright, inquisitive child, but lately, he had been more reserved. She had noticed little things, like how he would often stare off into space or how he would suddenly become quiet during moments that used to make him laugh. It wasn't like him to be so distant, and now, with this 911 call, it seemed like her concerns were starting to line up in a way that made her uneasy. Jessica decided to reach out to Karen again. She needed to know everything that had happened before the police arrived. She needed to understand what had led to Ethan's decision to dial the emergency number. Karen picked up quickly. "Hey, Jessica," she said, her voice still a bit shaky. "How's Ethan?" "He's okay," Jessica replied, her voice tight. "But I need you to tell me everything. What happened before he called 911? Karen hesitated for a moment. "I'm not sure what he was thinking. He was just playing like usual, and then suddenly he walked up to my phone and started pressing the buttons. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then he said, 'I need to talk to Mommy,' and that's when I realized he was dialing something. I didn't see the number he dialed, but I heard him talking to the 911 operator. He didn't seem scared, but he kept saying he needed to talk to you." Karen's voice was quiet, almost as if she was still processing what had happened. Jessica felt a chill run through her. "He said he needed to talk to me," she repeated, trying to make sense of it. "But why 911? Why not just call me directly?" "I don't know, Jessica." It was like he knew something was wrong, but he didn't know how to fix it. It was almost like he was trying to get your attention, you know? Like he sensed something, but didn't understand how to express it. Jessica felt a wave of guilt wash over her. Had she missed a sign? Had Ethan been trying to tell her that something wasn't right? She remembered how, when he had first called 911, he had only said, "Mommy," and "help." It was as if he couldn't articulate exactly what was wrong, but he knew he needed help. She wished she had paid more attention to the little things, the small changes in his behavior that might have signaled that he was struggling. "I don't understand," Jessica said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Ethan's always been so full of life. He's never been the type to keep things to himself. Why would he feel like this?" Karen's voice softened. "Jessica, I think he's just been confused lately. Maybe he's feeling something he can't explain. Kids that age don't have the words for their feelings, but they sense everything. And when they feel scared or worried, they don't know how to handle it. The conversation left Jessica feeling heavy with a mixture of guilt and concern. What was going on in Ethan's world that he couldn't share with her? She was his mother, his protector, but now she felt like she had missed something important. Had Ethan been holding on to something, some feeling or fear, without her even knowing? After hanging up with Karen, Jessica paced the living room. Her mind was still spinning, trying to figure out what Ethan was trying to tell her. She glanced over at him. He had now moved to the floor, stacking blocks into a tower. He was quiet again, but he wasn't showing signs of distress. Jessica stood in the doorway, watching him for a few minutes before deciding to sit beside him. "Ethan," she began softly, "can you tell Mommy what happened earlier? Why did you call 911? She asked gently, not wanting to scare him or make him feel pressured. Ethan looked up at her, his innocent blue eyes meeting hers. He furrowed his brow for a moment as if trying to find the words. Then, in his sweet, childlike voice, he said, "I wanted to talk to you. I wanted you to come home." Jessica's heart broke. The simplicity of his words shattered her. Ethan had called 911 not out of fear for his safety, but because he was lonely, wanting the reassurance of his mother. He had sensed her absence, her distraction, and tried in the only way he knew to bridge the gap. He didn't understand how to express that he needed her, so he resorted to the only thing he knew, calling for help. Jessica pulled him into her arms, holding him close as tears welled in her eyes. She had been so focused on the stresses of her own life that she hadn't seen what Ethan was going through. She hadn't noticed how, in his small world, the absence of his mother's constant presence was something that unsettled him. She hadn't recognized the signs of his need for comfort and connection. As she held him tightly, Jessica made a silent promise to herself that things would change. She would be more present, more attentive to Ethan's needs, and would never again take his quiet moments for granted. In the end, it wasn't the 911 call that had mattered most, it was the realization that her son, in his innocence, had tried to reach out for help in the best way he knew how. And Jessica, though shaken, now understood the importance of her role in his life, the impact of her presence, and the love that bound them together in ways words couldn't express. The officer's visit was the catalyst for this realization, but the real lesson was one of connection, of truly listening and paying attention to those we love, especially when they seem to be quiet. It was a humbling reminder for Jessica that, even in the midst of the chaos of daily life, the most important thing she could offer her son was her time, her attention, and her love. As the days went on, Jessica made changes in her routine. She started leaving her work at the office, prioritizing her time with Ethan when she was home. They spent evenings reading books, playing games, and talking about their day. Slowly but surely, Ethan's demeanor began to shift. He was more animated, more engaged, and more present. And Jessica, in turn, felt more connected to him than ever before. The incident, though shocking at the time, had sparked a transformation, a deepened understanding between mother and son that would last a lifetime. In the weeks following the 911 call, Jessica found herself constantly reflecting on the events that had unfolded so quickly. The moment she had feared most, that her son might be in danger, had turned out to be something entirely different. Yet, in some ways, the truth was more unsettling than she could have ever imagined. Ethan hadn't been calling for help in the traditional sense, he hadn't been frightened by a threat or an emergency. No, he had been calling because, in his innocent way, he had been trying to connect with her. His small voice, though not yet fully formed in language, had been asking for her attention, for her presence, for the reassurance that she was there when he needed her the most. As a mother, Jessica had always tried her best to be there for Ethan, but the pressures of work and life had slowly chipped away at the time she could dedicate to him. The simple truth was that she had been neglecting him, not out of malice, but out of distraction. She had been so focused on the demands of her job, the never-ending to-do lists, the constant balancing act of life, that she hadn't noticed how her absence, however brief, had been affecting her son. Ethan had always been a bright and independent child, often lost in his imaginative play or absorbed in his toys, but over the past few months, Jessica had noticed subtle changes in his behavior. He had become quieter, more withdrawn. His once constant energy had been replaced by long spells of silence, moments where he seemed to drift into his own world. Jessica had chalked it up to normal childhood phases, thinking it was just part of growing up. But now, with the clarity of hindsight, she realized those moments had been more than just phases, they were signals, cries for help in the only way he knew how. It wasn't that Ethan was neglected in the traditional sense. Jessica made sure he was fed, clothed, and safe. She ensured he had all the basic necessities, that he attended preschool and participated in activities that encouraged his development. But the emotional connection, the reassurance that he was loved and valued in every moment, had started to slip through the cracks. She had been busy, distracted, overwhelmed by the constant demands of life, and Ethan, in his quiet way, had responded by withdrawing further into himself. She stopped rushing through their time together, stopped multitasking during their moments at the dinner table, and started truly engaging with him in a way she hadn't done in months. As Jessica became more intentional about her time with Ethan, she began to notice positive changes in him as well. His energy returned. The silence that had once overshadowed their home began to fade, replaced by laughter, curiosity, and chatter. He started talking more about his day at preschool, sharing his thoughts on the stories they had read, and asking questions about the world around him. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and the bright, curious boy she had known was coming back. Yet, despite the improvements, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. While their bond had strengthened, and Ethan had become more open, there was a lingering sense of unease. It was as if the phone call to 911 had exposed a deeper truth about their lives, one that couldn't be ignored. There was still a gap, still a distance between them, though it was smaller than before. It was as though they had crossed a threshold, but there was still work to be done to heal the rift completely. That's when Jessica decided to seek professional help. She had heard of a child therapist in the area who specialized in early childhood development and family dynamics, and she thought it might be beneficial to have someone help guide them through this process of reconnecting. At first, the idea of therapy felt foreign to her, almost like admitting failure as a mother, but she quickly realized that it wasn't about failure, it was about growth. Ethan's well-being was her priority, and she wanted to make sure she was doing everything possible to support him in his emotional development. The therapist, Dr. Langley, was kind and understanding. She explained that many children, especially those as young as Ethan, often struggle to articulate their feelings in ways that adults could understand. They might act out, become withdrawn, or, in some cases, take extreme actions like calling 911, all in an attempt to communicate their needs. Dr. Langley helped Jessica understand that these behaviors weren't signs of something wrong with Ethan, they were signs of his deep emotional intelligence and his need for attention and connection. She also emphasized the importance of modeling healthy communication and emotional expression for Ethan, so that he could grow up knowing that it was okay to feel and express those feelings. Dr. Langley's guidance provided Jessica with a clearer understanding of what Ethan needed, and it helped her let go of the guilt she had been carrying. She learned that parenting wasn't about being perfect, it was about being present, being aware, and being willing to grow alongside her child. It was a journey, not a destination. As the months passed, Jessica and Ethan's relationship continued to evolve. Their bond became deeper, more rooted in trust, communication, and understanding. Jessica no longer saw her role as a caretaker who simply provided for Ethan's needs. She saw herself as a partner in his emotional growth, someone who could help him navigate the complexities of life with love and support. And Ethan, for his part, began to thrive. He was more confident, more open, and more comfortable expressing himself. He no longer felt the need to hide his emotions or bottle up his feelings. He knew that his mother would always be there, ready to listen, ready to guide him, ready to love him unconditionally. The 911 call, which had once seemed like a terrifying event, now stood as a pivotal moment in their relationship, an unexpected wake-up call that had set them on a path toward deeper connection and understanding. The lesson was clear: sometimes, it takes a crisis to help us realize what truly matters. And in that realization, Jessica found not only a better relationship with her son but also a better version of herself, a version of herself that was more present, more attentive, and more willing to face the emotional challenges of parenthood with an open heart. In the end, the 911 call wasn't about an emergency at all. It was about something much more profound: a child's simple need for love and connection, and a mother's awakening to the fact that she had the power to give that gift in abundance. As the months went by, Jessica found herself in a constant state of reflection. The phone call to 911, which had initially seemed like a freak accident, had unearthed something deep within her, something she hadn't even realized was missing. It wasn't just about Ethan's need for attention, it was about her own personal growth. The days following that harrowing moment had been filled with hard lessons, but they had also provided clarity. At work, Jessica noticed the changes in herself too. She had once been the person who answered every email with precision, who was always available for conference calls, and who never allowed herself to be offline for long. She had prided herself on being the model of productivity, the person everyone turned to when they needed something done. But now, she was realizing that she had been neglecting the things that mattered most. It wasn't just Ethan who needed her presence, it was also her own well-being. Her relationships, her emotional state, and her connection to her own life had all been sacrificed for the sake of efficiency. She had lived for deadlines, meetings, and outcomes, but in doing so, she had overlooked the simple, powerful things that gave life meaning: connection, joy, and love. As Jessica continued to grapple with these realizations, she became more determined to make lasting changes in her life. She wanted to build a home that was not just physically comfortable for Ethan, but emotionally nourishing for both of them. She began to prioritize family time above work commitments. Every evening, she carved out an hour where she and Ethan would do something together, whether it was reading books, drawing pictures, or just sitting and talking. It wasn't always easy. There were days when work demanded more of her attention, when emails and calls piled up, when her mind was preoccupied with obligations. But she stuck to it. She began saying no to extra hours, no to commitments that took her away from home, and yes to the moments that allowed her to reconnect with Ethan. It wasn't always convenient, but it was necessary. The transformation didn't happen overnight. There were still moments when she would slip back into her old habits, when the pressures of life would feel overwhelming, and when she would feel the urge to retreat into her work. But each time that happened, she would think back to that moment, the moment when Ethan had dialed 911, the moment that had shown her how desperately he needed her. It wasn't just a wake-up call for him, it was a wake-up call for her as well. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at work, Jessica found herself sitting on the floor of the living room, playing with Ethan's toys as he arranged his little figurines on the rug. It was a quiet evening, and for once, there were no distractions. The phone wasn't buzzing, there were no emails demanding her attention, and she wasn't thinking about deadlines or meetings. She was simply present with Ethan, fully immersed in his world. He looked up at her with his bright blue eyes, a wide grin on his face as he handed her a tiny action figure. "Mommy, play with me," he said, his voice filled with hope. Jessica smiled and took the figurine, nodding as she knelt down beside him. For a moment, it felt as though the weight of the world had melted away. In that space, there was no work, no pressure, no stress, there was only her and Ethan, two people in the same room, connected by nothing but the bond of love. It was a small moment, but it was profound. She could feel the transformation in her heart, the way her priorities had shifted, the way her perspective had changed. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. As Jessica continued to make these changes in her life, she noticed something else: Ethan was becoming more confident. His once quiet demeanor had transformed into a more outgoing, expressive personality. He spoke more, laughed more, and engaged with the world around him in a way that he hadn't before. Jessica was amazed by the subtle yet profound ways in which he had changed. The withdrawal she had once seen in him had dissipated, replaced by a curious, vibrant energy. He seemed happier, more at ease with himself. One day, as they sat together in the park, Jessica watched as Ethan approached a group of other children who were playing on the swings. He hesitated for a moment, looking back at her as if to seek reassurance. Jessica smiled and nodded, encouraging him to go ahead. With a deep breath, Ethan walked up to the other kids and asked if he could join their game. To Jessica's surprise, they immediately accepted him, welcoming him into their circle. She watched, her heart swelling with pride, as Ethan played with the other children, laughing and talking with them as if he had known them all his life. It was a moment that seemed so small, so ordinary, but for Jessica, it was a testament to how far he had come. The changes she had made in their relationship had helped him grow in ways she hadn't even realized were possible. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Jessica couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short time. She thought back to the fear she had felt when she received the call from the police, to the way her world had been shaken by the unexpected consequences of that one innocent act by Ethan. But now, as she watched him eat his dinner, his eyes bright and full of life, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. That phone call had opened her eyes to something important. It had forced her to confront the ways in which she had been neglecting both Ethan and herself. It had been the catalyst for change, a painful but necessary step in their journey toward a better, more fulfilling life. Jessica knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would still be challenges, still moments when life would demand more of her than she could give. But she had learned something invaluable. The most important thing in her life wasn't her job or her accomplishments or the things she could cross off a list. The most important thing was her relationship with Ethan, the bond they shared, the love they gave each other, and the way they learned and grew together. She had come to understand that love wasn't something that could be measured by productivity or efficiency. It was something that had to be nurtured, something that required time, attention, and presence. As Jessica looked at her son, she made a silent promise to herself. She would never again allow the distractions of life to pull her away from him. She would be there for him, truly, deeply, and fully, no matter what. The lesson of that 911 call had shaped her into the mother she wanted to be, and she was determined to continue that journey. Ethan, for his part, seemed to understand the changes in his mother as well. There was a new sense of trust between them, a new depth to their connection. He no longer needed to call 911 to get her attention. He knew, with certainty, that she would always be there when he needed her. And that, more than anything, was the greatest gift she could give him. In the years to come, Jessica and Ethan would face new challenges and new milestones. But no matter what the future held, they would face it together, stronger, more connected, and more resilient than ever before. And every time Jessica thought back to that moment when Ethan dialed 911, she would remember it not as a tragedy, but as a turning point, a catalyst for the love and connection that would sustain them both for the rest of their lives. As the seasons shifted, so did Jessica's life. Time had a way of moving forward, and with it came new challenges, some expected, others completely unforeseen. Yet, through it all, she had become stronger, more attuned to herself and her needs, and, most importantly, more aware of her role in Ethan's life. The lessons she had learned since that fateful phone call had shaped her into someone she barely recognized, a better version of herself, a version that Ethan could rely on, a version that didn't put work before family. But life, as it tends to, threw them another curveball that tested the changes she had made. One morning, as Jessica was preparing breakfast, she received an unexpected call from her workplace. She had just returned from a meeting the previous day and had thought the rest of the week would be quiet. Yet here she was, answering her boss's urgent call, her stomach sinking with each word. A major project, one she had been involved in for months, had suddenly hit a snag. A large part of the contract had been put on hold due to unforeseen complications, and there was pressure to resolve the issue quickly. Her boss, in a panic, asked her to fly out to another city immediately to meet with the client and resolve the issue face-to-face. The temptation to jump back into work, to put everything else on hold for this one monumental task, was overwhelming. The old Jessica, the one who would have said yes without hesitation, started to make an appearance. She could feel the familiar pull of deadlines, the thought of proving herself again to her colleagues and bosses. This was a huge opportunity, one that could elevate her career even further. But as she looked over at Ethan, sitting at the breakfast table, his little hands busy with his cereal, something inside her clicked. The past months of making time for him, of being there in moments big and small, had given her a sense of peace. She could feel the warmth of their bond, the quiet moments they shared, and the weight of her responsibilities as his mother. In that moment, as she watched him laugh at something silly on his cereal box, she knew that she couldn't just leave again. The thought of missing out on the little things, the moments of joy, the times he would need her most, was no longer something she could ignore. The old workaholic Jessica might have taken that flight, but the new Jessica was resolute in her decision to stay home, to be present with Ethan. She called her boss back, a sense of calm filling her voice as she explained the situation. She offered alternatives, ways to resolve the issue without her immediate presence, and promised to stay connected through remote communication. It wasn't easy, her boss was disappointed, and the pressure to deliver was still there. But Jessica stood firm, explaining that her family needed her, and that her role as a mother came first. The relief she felt after making that decision was palpable. For once, she wasn't torn between two worlds. She had made a choice that honored both her personal life and her professional integrity. Her boss, though not thrilled, understood. Jessica wasn't abandoning her career, she was simply setting boundaries, recognizing that her role as a mother was not something she could sacrifice for work. And as she hung up the phone, she felt a quiet sense of pride. This was the new Jessica, strong, confident, and unwavering in her commitment to her family. Ethan, as if sensing the shift in her, gave her an enormous hug that morning. It was as if he understood, in his own way, that she was choosing him over the chaos of her career. She smiled, running her fingers through his hair, a deep sense of satisfaction washing over her. She realized that the true measure of her success wasn't in her job title or her paycheck, it was in the relationships she had built, particularly the one with her son. That bond was her greatest accomplishment, one that no job, no career milestone, could ever replace. As the weeks passed, Jessica's decision to prioritize Ethan paid off in ways she hadn't anticipated. She found herself more engaged in their day-to-day lives. She was there for his school events, his doctor appointments, his playdates with friends. She no longer felt the constant tug of work demanding her time and energy. She could focus on what truly mattered, watching Ethan grow, hearing him speak more confidently, seeing him embrace new experiences. She had not just been a passive observer in his life, she had become an active participant, someone who was truly there, in every sense of the word. But the changes in Jessica weren't just limited to her relationship with Ethan. Her friendships also deepened. Over time, she had started reconnecting with old friends, those who had faded into the background when she was consumed by work. She had been so focused on climbing the career ladder that she had neglected the relationships that had once been her lifeline. Now, with more time on her hands and a renewed sense of balance, she rekindled those connections. It was as though the new Jessica had unlocked a part of herself that she had long buried, the part that craved human connection, the part that valued quality over quantity. One evening, Jessica had invited a close friend, Mia, over for dinner. Mia had been a college roommate, someone Jessica had once shared everything with. But over the years, as their lives diverged, they had lost touch. Mia had always been understanding, never pressing Jessica when work had taken over. But this time, over glasses of wine and a warm meal, they talked for hours. Mia told Jessica about her own experiences, her own journey, and the lessons she had learned. It was an exchange that felt deeply fulfilling, and Jessica realized how much she had missed these kinds of conversations. She had become so wrapped up in her career that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be truly vulnerable with someone, to share her fears, her hopes, and her dreams without the fear of being judged or misunderstood. That night, as Mia left, Jessica felt a deep sense of gratitude. Her life was no longer just about the grind, the endless pursuit of success, and the approval of others. It was about the people who mattered most to her, the ones who supported her, the ones who challenged her, and the ones who loved her unconditionally. She realized that in focusing on her family, she had also made room for herself, a new, more authentic version of herself. As the months continued, Jessica and Ethan's life became a testament to the power of change. They had built a life together, a life filled with small but meaningful moments. Jessica had learned that balance was the key to everything. Her career, while still important, no longer defined her. Her worth was no longer tied to what she achieved in the workplace. Her value came from being present, from making memories with Ethan, from the love they shared. In the grand scheme of things, life wasn't about monumental achievements or accolades. It was about the moments that brought true joy, the laughter shared over a meal, the quiet conversations before bed, the feeling of connection that transcended the busyness of life. Jessica had learned that it was in the simple, everyday moments that life's true treasures were found. And as she looked at Ethan, she knew that every decision she had made in the past year had been worth it. He was thriving, and so was she. They were both learning, growing, and transforming together, shaping their future in a way that was grounded in love, presence, and understanding. And for the first time in a long time, Jessica knew she was exactly where she needed to be. As the days continued to stretch into weeks, Jessica's decision to reorient her life around her family began to settle in more deeply. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, it wasn't the kind of change that happened overnight. But gradually, she could feel herself becoming a different person, someone who no longer defined her worth by her professional achievements, but rather by her ability to be present, loving, and nurturing. This journey, though fraught with challenges, had allowed Jessica to rediscover parts of herself she had long ignored. One particularly transformative moment came in the spring. Ethan had come home from school one afternoon, his usual enthusiasm muted, his eyes unusually downcast. Jessica immediately noticed the change in him, the way he moved more slowly than usual, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Ethan, for all his boisterous energy, was usually transparent in his emotions. Something was bothering him, and she knew it wasn't just a fleeting mood. "Hey buddy, what's going on?" Jessica asked gently, sitting down beside him as he slumped onto the couch, his backpack still on his back. Ethan hesitated, looking up at her as though weighing his words. "Some kids at school were making fun of me," he finally admitted, his voice small, a stark contrast to the confident child she had come to know. "They said my clothes looked weird and that my hair was messy." Jessica's heart ached. It was a parent's worst nightmare, hearing their child's vulnerability exposed in such a way. She had worked so hard to create a safe space for him, to nurture his self-esteem and sense of worth. Yet here was a crack in the facade, a moment where his innocence was challenged in a way she couldn't protect him from. She could feel the tears rising in her own throat, the urge to shield him, to fight back against the injustice of it all. But she knew that in this moment, her role as a mother was not just to protect him but to teach him how to navigate the world on his own. "Hey," she said softly, her hand resting on his shoulder, "I know it hurts. But let me tell you something. There is nothing wrong with who you are, not one thing. You are perfect just as you are. What other people say, well, sometimes people say things to make themselves feel better. It's not a reflection of you, but of them." Ethan looked at her with wide eyes, as though the weight of her words was sinking in. Jessica continued, "I know it's hard to believe that right now, but this is a small thing in the big picture of your life. You are kind, you are smart, and you have so much to offer. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're less than what you are." Her words seemed to break through, and for the first time that day, Jessica saw a flicker of light in his eyes. He sat up straighter, his posture relaxing as though the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. But the lesson wasn't just about standing up to bullies. As the days continued to stretch into weeks, Jessica's decision to reorient her life around her family began to settle in more deeply. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, it wasn't the kind of change that happened overnight. But gradually, she could feel herself becoming a different person, someone who no longer defined her worth by her professional achievements, but rather by her ability to be present, loving, and nurturing. This journey, though fraught with challenges, had allowed Jessica to rediscover parts of herself she had long ignored. One particularly transformative moment came in the spring. Ethan had come home from school one afternoon, his usual enthusiasm muted, his eyes unusually downcast. Jessica immediately noticed the change in him, the way he moved more slowly than usual, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Ethan, for all his boisterous energy, was usually transparent in his emotions. Something was bothering him, and she knew it wasn't just a fleeting mood. "Hey buddy, what's going on?" Jessica asked gently, sitting down beside him as he slumped onto the couch, his backpack still on his back. Ethan hesitated, looking up at her as though weighing his words. "Some kids at school were making fun of me," he finally admitted, his voice small, a stark contrast to the confident child she had come to know. "They said my clothes looked weird and that my hair was messy." Jessica's heart ached. It was a parent's worst nightmare, hearing their child's vulnerability exposed in such a way. She had worked so hard to create a safe space for him, to nurture his self-esteem and sense of worth. Yet here was a crack in the facade, a moment where his innocence was challenged in a way she couldn't protect him from. She could feel the tears rising in her own throat, the urge to shield him, to fight back against the injustice of it all. But she knew that in this moment, her role as a mother was not just to protect him but to teach him how to navigate the world on his own. "Hey," she said softly, her hand resting on his shoulder, "I know it hurts. But let me tell you something. There is nothing wrong with who you are, not one thing. You are perfect just as you are. What other people say, well, sometimes people say things to make themselves feel better. It's not a reflection of you, but of them." Ethan looked at her with wide eyes, as though the weight of her words was sinking in. Jessica continued, "I know it's hard to believe that right now, but this is a small thing in the big picture of your life. You are kind, you are smart, and you have so much to offer. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're less than what you are." Her words seemed to break through, and for the first time that day, Jessica saw a flicker of light in his eyes. He sat up straighter, his posture relaxing as though the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. But the lesson wasn't just about standing up to bullies. It was about self-worth, about internalizing the truth that no one else's opinion should define who you are. The conversation with Ethan was a defining moment in their relationship, one that brought them even closer. It reminded Jessica that being a mother wasn't just about giving advice or providing for his physical needs, it was about emotional support, about being the safe harbor he could always turn to. She had become a constant source of encouragement, someone who not only loved him unconditionally but also believed in him wholeheartedly. In the weeks that followed, Jessica saw subtle changes in Ethan. He started to stand a little taller, his voice a little more confident. He became less bothered by the occasional teasing at school, brushing it off with a resilience that was beyond his years. Jessica knew that she had to continue being a role model for him, showing him not just how to be strong, but also how to be compassionate, how to embrace kindness and empathy, how to make choices that reflected his values rather than seeking approval from others. But she also knew that this lesson was one she had to learn for herself. Just as Ethan needed to believe in his own worth, she needed to reinforce her own. It was easy to forget that sometimes, to lose sight of the value she brought to the world, to feel small in a world that was constantly telling her to achieve more, to do more, to be more. But she was learning to see herself differently. She was learning to appreciate the small moments, those times when Ethan came to her for a hug after a long day, the times they laughed together over silly jokes, the quiet mornings when they sipped hot cocoa while watching the sun rise. These were the moments that mattered, the moments that made her feel whole. She had built something more important than a career. She had built a family, a partnership with Ethan that was rooted in love and trust. Yet the transformation wasn't only about her relationship with Ethan. It was about her entire perspective on life. Jessica had started to get involved in the community, something she hadn't made time for in the past. She volunteered at local shelters, helped organize events at Ethan's school, and became more active in supporting causes she believed in. Her view of success had shifted. It wasn't about climbing a corporate ladder anymore. It was about making a tangible difference in the lives of others, about leaving a legacy that her son could look back on with pride. One of the most fulfilling projects she had taken on was a community initiative to support underprivileged families. She had always been moved by the stories of those struggling, but it wasn't until she took action that she understood just how deeply interconnected people were. But the lesson wasn't just about standing up to bullies. It was about self-worth, about internalizing the truth that no one else's opinion should define who you are. The conversation with Ethan was a defining moment in their relationship, one that brought them even closer. It reminded Jessica that being a mother wasn't just about giving advice or providing for his physical needs, it was about emotional support, about being the safe harbor he could always turn to. She had become a constant source of encouragement, someone who not only loved him unconditionally but also believed in him wholeheartedly. In the weeks that followed, Jessica saw subtle changes in Ethan. He started to stand a little taller, his voice a little more confident. He became less bothered by the occasional teasing at school, brushing it off with a resilience that was beyond his years. Jessica knew that she had to continue being a role model for him, showing him not just how to be strong, but also how to be compassionate, how to embrace kindness and empathy, how to make choices that reflected his values rather than seeking approval from others. But she also knew that this lesson was one she had to learn for herself. Just as Ethan needed to believe in his own worth, she needed to reinforce her own. It was easy to forget that sometimes, to lose sight of the value she brought to the world, to feel small in a world that was constantly telling her to achieve more, to do more, to be more. But she was learning to see herself differently. She was learning to appreciate the small moments, those times when Ethan came to her for a hug after a long day, the times they laughed together over silly jokes, the quiet mornings when they sipped hot cocoa while watching the sun rise. These were the moments that mattered, the moments that made her feel whole. She had built something more important than a career. She had built a family, a partnership with Ethan that was rooted in love and trust. Yet the transformation wasn't only about her relationship with Ethan. It was about her entire perspective on life. Jessica had started to get involved in the community, something she hadn't made time for in the past. She volunteered at local shelters, helped organize events at Ethan's school, and became more active in supporting causes she believed in. Her view of success had shifted. It wasn't about climbing a corporate ladder anymore. It was about making a tangible difference in the lives of others, about leaving a legacy that her son could look back on with pride. One of the most fulfilling projects she had taken on was a community initiative to support underprivileged families. She had always been moved by the stories of those struggling, but it wasn't until she took action that she understood just how deeply interconnected people were.